Mason is 10 years older than me. I've liked him for 10 years, but we've never been together. I've confessed my love to him hundreds of times, and he's always rejected me, but I've never been discouraged. Once, his fiancée Sophia even slapped me, but I still haven't given up. But to make me give up, he sent me to bed with an old man on my birthday. Emily, you should really remember. Don't fall for a man who is much older than you. He lit a cigarette casually and stared at me with a half smile, just like all these years. Every time I confessed my love to him, he just laughed it off. It seems, in his eyes, my sincerity was nothing but a joke. In the evening, I dried my tears and threw the ring he gave me when I turned 18 out the window. Mason, I give up. I shouldn't love you anymore. On my 23rd birthday, Mason had prepared New York's biggest cyber fireworks show for me. Thousands of drones gathered in the night sky. The lights kept changing, creating sparkling blessings. At that moment, Emily rang out in the sky. Happy birthday. Worry-free years. Mason stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows. The glass reflected the colorful lights, adding a layer of shadows to his deep face. He tilted his head slightly and took out a sandalwood jewelry box from his suit pocket. He opened the box. I saw that inside was a glittering emerald necklace. It was obviously very valuable. I heard that not long ago Mason bought such an emerald at an auction abroad. It seems to be the one I'm holding. However, this is not what I want. I have been chasing Mason for 10 whole years. He has given me many precious gems and antiques. The house is full of cabinets, but he just wouldn't stay with me. The jadate necklace in my hands sparkled. It looked very precious, but even if it was expensive, I had grown tired of it over the past 10 years. To Mason, money was nothing that money couldn't solve. Maybe in his heart, I wasn't special either. I closed the box. I said thank you softly. Mason gently rubbed my head. He smiled and said, "Cheer up. You really want to make me happy, or are you just saying that?" I looked him straight in the eye. He sighed. "What would you like me to do to make you happy? You actually know how to make me happy. You just don't want to." I said. I noticed his expression become a little cold. He lowered his head. His tone was cold. "Emily, I don't want to talk about this today." I wasn't going to back down. I looked up at him. "What if I want to? Today is my birthday. You're not even willing to grant me a small wish." His face suddenly turned gloomy. "Are you threatening me?" I felt my heart grow cold, but I couldn't help but say it. "Mason, you said I was young. I didn't know anything. Now I'm 23. You said I would regret it. Because you're so much older than me. But 10 years have passed. I don't regret it at all. When are you finally going to be with me?" It seemed as if time had come to a standstill. The drone show outside had not yet finished. The faint light shone inside. I had almost pushed him up against the floor-to-ceiling windows. The scent of cedarwood filled the air. It was the perfume on his suit. I stared into his eyes, looking for an answer. After a long while, he gave a small smile and turned his head, as if to say, "You really like me." At that moment, my heart sank. Every time I show him my true feelings, he always avoids it perfunctorily. My whole body trembled. I tried hard not to let the tears fall. I rushed up to him and hugged him. "Mason, do you like me after all?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said coldly, "Emily, I support you, not to let you become my child bride." After saying that, he violently pushed my hand away, ready to walk towards the door. I sat down with a thud. I glanced at the jewelry boxes that had fallen to the ground. I felt a sense of irony well up in me. I grabbed one of the boxes and threw it at him. "Don't do anything fake. I don't need it." But he didn't even turn around. "You think I'm pretending. Suit yourself, Emily. Liking me will make you regret it." I sat alone by the window until dawn. My phone suddenly rang. It was a message from my senior, David. "Emily, the teacher suddenly called a meeting. Why haven't you replied in the group yet? Time is a bit tight. Where are you? I'll come pick you up." I wanted to refuse, but suddenly I got into his car. Usually I take Mason's car to school, but last night we had a huge fight. I really didn't want to see him. David's car was parked in front of the gate. I just opened the door. A Maybach pulled up, the window lowered. Mason's cold side profile appeared in front of me. "Emily, get in." I ignored him. David looked a little confused. He asked me, "Emily, Who is he? I smiled. I deliberately said, someone I don't know very well. Mason heard this. He turned his head. His eyes suddenly turned cold. It was as if he had been frozen. He looked at me deeply and smiled through gritted teeth. Emily, you've really grown up. David seemed to sense the tension. He looked around awkwardly. I said, let's go. We'll be late. As soon as the car started, a cloud of black smoke billowed from the exhaust pipe, leaving Mason behind. David asked me, have you applied for the exchange program in the UK? If you go, we can look after each other. I was a little surprised. David, you know, it's not easy to get credits in the UK. This is a rare opportunity. You could have worked directly under Professor Manstein. Emily, don't you want to think about it? He asked. His eyes were full of expectation. I just gave a small smile. Let's talk about it later. I actually prefer to stay in the country. I thought about saying that, but didn't say it. In fact, I actually prefer to stay by Mason's side. I will definitely wait until I catch up with him. That day, Mason and I never spoke. In the evening, he sent me a WeChat message. It simply said, I like you. Come and see me. The address is room 3108, Hilton Hotel. Mason owned the Hilton Hotel. I guessed he was busy there. I had won the Cold War. I felt a little pleased with myself, but I also felt a little awkward. Mason, you told me to come here. I just won't. He quickly sent a message back. It's better if you don't come, but I went anyway. I stood in front of the door. I felt a little nervous. Would he want to be with me, seeing him? I didn't know what to say. After 10 years, I didn't know how to express myself. Maybe I didn't need to say anything. I just wanted to give him a hug. I took a deep breath, pushed open the door, and walked in. There was no light on in the room. As soon as I entered, a figure rushed over. The smell of alcohol and bad breath hit me in the face. Fat hands groped all over me. The man gave a smug smile. Mason had actually found such a young girl. A sneer curled the corner of his mouth. I screamed in fear. I desperately tried to escape. I bumped into the entrance. I hurriedly switched on the light. The light instantly flooded into the room. I could see clearly. In front of me was a middle-aged man with a face full of excess fat. I recognized this person, Mr. Johnson, who had worked with Mason a few times. I trembled a little. I hurriedly said, "You've got the wrong person." "I'm not." Before I could finish, he interrupted me gruffly. "It's not you." "Then who is it?" Mason said he wanted to give me a big present. I never thought he'd be willing to give me the little gem he's raised himself. "That's really generous of him," he chattered on. "But seriously, I heard you were raised by him. There's no reason why you shouldn't be doing something. For decades, it's like raising pigs. It's time to use it." I felt a chill come over me. Mason, how could he hand me over to this man? This man must be talking nonsense. He's got it all wrong. The man lunged at me again. "Little beauty, come with me. I can give you everything Mason can." I broke out in a cold sweat. I took 2 hasty steps back. "You've got it all wrong. Mason would never let you do this. Let go of me." His large hands gripped me like iron. I couldn't push him off. Still struggling, "I care for you more than Mason ever could." Just then, the door slammed open. 2 black-clad bodyguards pulled him away from me. Mason strode in. He took off his trench coat and wrapped it around me and held me tightly in his arms. "It's okay, Emily. It's okay." He held me close. He gently wiped away the tears on my face with his hand. His voice was cold as ice. "Tie him up, cut off his hands, send him to Mexico." Mr. Johnson was pinned to the ground by the bodyguards. His face was terrified. "Mason, you can't do this. You're the one who sent her here. You said you were going to give me a big present." Mason gave a cold smile. He lifted his foot and kicked. The shoe print left a vivid mark on Mr. Johnson's fat face. It was really quite comical. His eyes were sharp. He glanced at Mr. Johnson. A sneer of contempt curled the corner of his mouth. "You collaborated with Los Angeles. You betrayed me. You didn't think I knew about it, did you? I'll give you 10 seconds. Tell me what you know." The man immediately became nervous. "Mason, I was wrong. I don't have a lot of patience." Mason sat me down on the sofa, slowly took a cigarette out of his pocket, put it in his mouth. Then he put the lighter back in its case. He laughed softly. "I almost forgot. My Emily doesn't like the smell of smoke." The man was still on the floor. begging for mercy, but Mason ignored him. He just played with the silver gray lighter in his hands. The flame flickered, seeing the man's growing desperation. Finally, he sobbed and told him everything he knew. Mason didn't even take a drag. He casually threw the cigarette at the man's face and sneered. "This is my Mason, a good dog." He picked me up sideways and walked out the door. "Emily, let's go home." It was already dark outside. It started to drizzle. Colorful lights were flashing in the rain. Mason's driver hurriedly jumped out of the car with a black umbrella, but he couldn't catch up to him. He put me in the back seat. Although the back of my shirt was soaked, he was busy drying me with a blanket. I was a little confused by this moment of tenderness. Maybe he really cared about me. However, if he really loved me, why did he trick me into going to 3108? Mason is so smart. How could he get the room number wrong? The only explanation was that he was deliberately lying to me. I stared at him blankly. Tears flowed unstoppably down my face. "Mason, what's going on?" He looked up at me. His eyes suddenly became cold. Then he waved his hand, telling the driver to get out first. Just from that glance, I understood a lot. "Why did you do this to me?" I was feeling bad, but he just gave a faint smile. "I know I can't fool you. Emily, you need to learn a lesson." He took out a cigarette case from his pocket. He lit one. His tone was as casual as if he were just chatting. "Don't fall in love with someone older than you. Old men only have an unpleasant smell." I felt it was really ridiculous. He turned his head. In the faint light of the fire, his eyes shone like a wolf's. "Don't look for those old men anymore." "I can't, and neither can your senior." I finally understand. It feels like all the strength in my body has been sucked away. It's because of this. "Mason, do you think this is funny, watching me be toyed with by you, watching me tremble with fear? Do you think this is funny? Mason, do you really care about me?" He stubbed out his cigarette. "Emily, dispel those thoughts of yours. We'll be just like before. You never have to worry about money. After you graduate from graduate school, I'll send you abroad. Mason Group has hundreds of branches. You can go wherever you want." I froze. What did he think of me? Was it just to humiliate and trample on me, and still want to be the same as before? First destroyed my self-esteem, and then used money to make up for it. This is the person I have loved for 10 years. I always felt that, although he didn't say it, but he must care about me in his heart, even if it was just a little. I never thought that this was just an illusion. I have loved him for 10 whole years. 10 years. Even the stone should have turned warm in the face of my confession. He never said a word. I also thought about giving up. When Mason and Sophia got engaged, I went to find him and asked him why he was with someone he didn't like, why he was willing to marry a girl he didn't love, but wasn't willing to be with me for even one day. He didn't say a word. He just let me cry and scream in his office for an hour. I knew I couldn't change him. I dried my tears, went to school, and didn't speak to Mason for the whole next month, didn't see him either. Then, Sophia found me. She heard the news from somewhere, and found our lab exactly. "Emily." She looked me up and down. There was some disdain in her eyes. "Your parents gave you this name. I think they wanted you to be polite and gentle. But instead, you're seducing other people's fiancés." As she said this, she raised her hand and slapped me. I could have avoided it, but I didn't move. My face felt burning hot. Everyone around us was looking over. She was so arrogant. "Mason is my fiancé. We were made for each other. You're just a little girl who's been supported by him. What can you possibly bring to the table?" she said. She took out a stack of money from her bag. She threw it at me. "Take this money. Don't let me know you're going to see Mason again." The red banknotes flew in the air. It attracted the surrounding people to become more noisy. I really didn't expect that this kind of plot in a TV drama would happen to me. I looked at her. I felt really funny in my heart. "Sophia, you rich people like to mock others like this, don't you? I haven't contacted Mason for a long time, and I won't be contacting him again. I hope you both stay out of my life." That night, I finally returned to Mason's villa. I packed all my belongings and prepared to leave forever. Mason stood in the doorway of my room and quietly looked at me. He only said 2 words. "I have already dissolved my engagement with Sophia. Which hand did she hit you with?" When I saw Sophia again, she was sitting in Mason's office. Her right hand was in a cast. Her eyes were red. It looked like she had been crying. She was shaking a little. Her voice was choked with emotion. She pleaded with Mason. Mason, I beg you to stop targeting Sophia's family. We really have nowhere else to turn. Mason leaned back in his chair. He played with a fountain pen in his hands. His face was expressionless. He remained silent. Sophia saw me sitting on the sofa and suddenly kneeled down. Emily, I beg you, please make him stop. I know I was wrong. She raised her left hand and slapped herself, this one. I'll return it to you. I didn't want to face her and went straight to Mason. Let her go, I told him. Mason raised his eyes and glanced at me. This is just a warning. I hope you can be more careful in the future. I actually understood in my heart. Sophia knew how to find me. She knew about Mason and me. Mason wanted to use her against me. I didn't think Missy would go too far, but I was still tempted. He broke off the engagement for me and took revenge on Sophia's family. I felt it was worth it even if I got slapped. He used Sophia to trick me. I can also use Sophia to trick him. His engagement is ruined. I thought I had won his heart, but in the end, it was just an illusion. I gave a bitter smile. Under the neon lights, I felt like my 10 years had vanished like rain. Maybe Mason and I were just not meant to be. I asked him, Mason, why do you rich people like to look down on others? Do you know what the last Sophia lady said when she approached me? She said you and I were made for each other. We come from the same social class. I always understood that. Now I understand. You are all cold and selfish. I lower my head. I look at the shiny ring on my hand. Mason, you gave me this ring on my 18th birthday. At the time, I nagged you for a matching ring. You finally couldn't resist. You bought me a pair. I thought you bought this ring because you also liked me. But now I understand. I was wrong. This ring makes me feel like he and I belong together. But I've been wearing it for 6 years. He's never worn it today. I decided to throw away this ring. From now on, I will no longer have any illusions about you. I gave a bitter smile, wiped away the tears, and threw the ring out the window with all my strength. Mason, you were right. Loving you will eventually make me regret it. I admit defeat. I shouldn't have loved you. I opened the car door and walked out in the rain. Mason followed close behind me. He insisted on putting his jacket around my shoulders. His tone was serious. Emily, stop this nonsense. Let's go home first. Home. That was his home, not mine. I stared at him. He was like a child he was trying to placate. His tone was relaxed. It's fine that you threw the ring away. I'll buy you 10 more, so you can wear them on both hands. What do you say? That won't do. I shook his hand off forcefully. The anger on his face gradually became apparent. Emily, I don't have time to play games with you. He raised his hand and looked at his watch. I'll give you 3 minutes. Think about whether you want to go home with me today. I looked up, trying to appear calm, but tears were about to fall anyway. But he was already impatient. He leaned down directly and picked me up. While struggling, I bit his shoulder. He drew a breath, but he didn't let me go. Tears welled up in my eyes. I whispered to him, Mason, do you really not like me? This time, he didn't look away. He gave me a cold answer, very clear. I don't like you. It felt like a heavy blow to my heart. I didn't struggle anymore. I lowered my head and leaned on his shoulder. I burst into tears. In the middle of the night, I opened the exchange student application form again. This time I didn't procrastinate and quickly filled in all the details. Maybe if we don't see each other, we won't be able to let go of each other. I signed the application form with a flourish next to the word applicant, and I silently said to myself, goodbye, Mason. Goodbye, the 10 years we've been through together. I was probably just too tired. I fell asleep at the desk without realizing. When I woke up, it was still dark. A faint morning light shone through. I saw Mason standing next to the desk, holding my application to study abroad in his hands. His face was very pale. What's this? He asked. I snatched the application form from him and said in a flat tone, didn't you say you didn't want to see me? You want to send me abroad, right? Then I'll go by myself. He stared at me. There was no emotion in his dark eyes. After a while, he gave a faint smile and said, okay, when do you want to go? I can send you on a special flight, he asked. I had actually long since told myself to let go of this relationship, not to be sad for him anymore. But seeing his indifferent expression, my heart still ached a little. I blinked hard, held back the tears, and said lightly, "No need. I'll just take the flight with my classmates." He nodded and said, "Okay, that's it then. I'll feel relieved to have a friend with you." In the following days, I slowly moved my luggage out and no longer stayed at the villa. Occasionally, I ran into Mason at the villa. I would politely call him Mason. He frowned slightly and asked, "Emily, what are you doing?" She shrugged and answered, "I think it's good for us to keep some distance." He laughed with a hint of dissatisfaction in his tone. "Emily, you're flying off the handle. How long are you going to keep this up?" She shook her head and hurriedly explained, "It's not a fight," she thought to herself. Mason had no intention of asking me to stay, and I hadn't told him the date of my departure. But on the day of my flight, he showed up at the airport, dressed in a black trench coat, holding a big bouquet of irises. It attracted the attention of passers-by. We stood very close to each other. He held the flowers in one hand and the other in his pocket, his gaze fixed on me. We looked at each other. A thought suddenly occurred to me. If at this moment he asked me to stay, what would I say? But he didn't ask. He reached out and tousled the stray hairs on my forehead. Then he handed me the flowers. "They are your favorite. I hope you have a safe trip." I smiled. My gaze lingered on the flowers. Once upon a time, I looked forward to receiving flowers from him. I had given him plenty of hints, but I haven't received a single one in 10 years. He, Mason, is worth over 100 million. He can easily give me anything of value, but he just won't give me what I want. Neither his love, nor a bouquet of flowers, thank you. I used to like it, but not anymore. He froze for a moment, then he smiled. "Since you don't like it, there's no point in me keeping it." He casually threw the bouquet into the trash can next to him. I looked at my watch. "I should go. This is as far as I go." He nodded. I took 2 steps, then he called out to me, "Emily." He paused and asked, "When will you be back?" I stared at him. The person I loved for 10 years. The person who also caused me 10 years of pain. He was always dressed in a suit, looking so calm. Even though I was far away from him, there was no trace of weakness or lingering feelings in his eyes. That's Mason. I suddenly felt a little relieved. Maybe in 3 or 5 years' time, I won't come back. After saying that, I turned around and walked away. I didn't look back. I thought I wouldn't see Mason again for a long time at least, but I didn't expect. As soon as I got on the plane, there was a familiar figure sitting next to me. "Mason?" I asked in surprise. He never flies economy class. He closed the magazine in his hands and leaned back in his seat, however. His 185 cm height was not enough for the plane seat. He frowned. He said lightly, "I just have some business in the UK. Don't think too much about it." I nodded. I didn't plan to say anything else. Not long after, David came over with a bag on his back. He said in a gentle tone, "Hello, can you change seats? We are together." Mason looked up. His face had a somewhat indifferent expression. He briefly replied, "No, we're together too." David's face froze instantly. "Mason, don't make things difficult. Aren't you going to talk business?" I was a little confused, thinking, if you don't change, I will. "Sorry, David." I stood up, ready to sit with you over there. At this time, Mason suddenly grabbed me. His eyes swept to David, with a sneer at the corner of his mouth. "Emily, didn't I tell you I can't, and neither can he?" "Mason, what are you doing? He's my senior in the same martial arts school. This is so annoying." I tried hard to shake his hand off, but I just couldn't. He sat firmly, completely still. "I've already said it. We're together. At least until we go to England, you have to stay with me." I was anxious and angry. I was about to argue with him. Unexpectedly, my voice attracted the attention of the cabin crew. Finally, after some negotiation, David returned to his seat. I sat there, staring at Mason's cold profile. My heart was in a mess. He was the one I had left, and the one who had warned me not to have any improper thoughts about him. But why did he want to keep me by his side now? I asked him softly, "Mason, you rejected me again and again. You're the one who said you didn't love me. What are you doing now?" He didn't answer right away. Not until I had pulled the blanket up around me and was about to fall asleep. Then I heard him speak. "Actually, there are many kinds of love. I'm sorry. Emily, I can't give you what you want. "It's not that I don't love you," he said, but I didn't feel happy. Instead, I felt a surge of anger and injustice. "Mason, are you saying that you love me?" I challenged him. "Do you love someone and then send them to another man?" His face seemed to turn white for a moment when he heard this. "I'm sorry. He began to say, but I interrupted him coldly. "That's enough. We're over. You wanted a result. I don't want to talk about the past. I don't want to remember it. I understand. It really isn't worth falling in love with the wrong person. Mason, please keep your distance in the future." 3 months later, I saw Mason again. During the 3 months in England, I made a lot of new friends and gradually got out of my self-pity. Today, I was concentrating on my work in the lab when the professor suddenly walked in. "Emily, I heard that today is your holiday. There must be a surprise waiting for you." He gave a mysterious smile. "I'll give you 3 days off. You have family visiting from the United States." I didn't expect the person who came would be Mason. The professor seemed to have misunderstood something and gave a small smile. He said, "Emily, your boyfriend really cares about you. Take advantage of this opportunity. Don't worry about reporting in advance." He patted my shoulder and walked away with a smile. I felt a little confused. "Mason, how did you find this place? What did you tell him?" He raised his eyebrows. "Nothing. I'm just the sponsor of your lab now. No wonder the usually strict professor gave me 3 days off in particular. So Mason has become the patron of our lab. But I still feel strange. Why do you want to invest in a university lab?" He answered lazily. "I have a lot of money. Nothing to do. I really don't understand what he is doing." I said calmly, "Mason, I told you before, it's better if we don't meet. Is there anything wrong? If not, then I'll go back first. The lab report is not yet ready." But he took 2 steps towards me, staring at me. A warm light flashed in his dark eyes. "Emily, today is Thanksgiving. It's been a long time. Let's have dinner together," he said, but I looked away. Thanksgiving is a holiday celebrated with family. You should go back to the Mason family. When he heard this, he snorted, rubbed his brow, and was about to say something. At that moment, the phone rang. He walked away to answer it. Some impatience was visible on his face. I heard him say coldly, "I'm not coming back. I refuse. And don't arrange any more marriage matches for me in the future." From his vague words, I guessed that the Mason family had arranged a blind date today. Mason's grandfather had been looking for a suitable match for him. Sophia before was the niece of the grandfather's friend. Before, Mason didn't object to this, but today he seemed to be rejecting the idea. I couldn't help but ask. He glanced at me and quickly looked away. He didn't want me to see what was in his mind. Before, I didn't think it was important, but now I felt it was very important. "Emily, I've booked a private room at a Michelin-starred restaurant. Spend some time with me." "Okay," I finally agreed. Mason was just like before. He didn't say much. He just quietly ate the caviar on his plate. If it were the old days, I would have found a way to liven up the mood. I would have tried to ease the frown on his face. But now, I no longer want to continue like this. During dinner, everyone was quiet. When it was time to leave, he wanted to walk me back to my dorm. But I refused. He is the patron of the lab. I am just an ordinary student. I don't want anyone to know about my relationship with Mason. He tried to say something a few times, but stopped. I was about to leave. Then he called out to me again, and then he opened the trunk of his Rolls-Royce. It had grown dark. The lights were coming on all around. When I looked in, the trunk was full of yellow roses, and there were some balloon letters in the middle. They spelled out "Forgive me." Next to them was a jewelry box. In it was a card. It was in Mason's handwriting. It was a bit scrawly. "Sorry, I shouldn't have treated you like that." I opened the jewelry box. Inside was a beautiful necklace with gemstones. Mason stood nearby. He looked a little uneasy. One hand was in his pocket. His feet kept turning around there. He whispered, "Emily, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have treated you like that." He closed his eyes for a moment. There was a hint of bitterness in his voice. "Actually, that day I saw you with your brother, it was quite difficult. I thought this would make you understand that you should pursue a better life and let you let go of your thoughts about me. But I was wrong. After you left, I realized that it wasn't that you couldn't bear to let me go. It was that I couldn't bear to let you go. I silently stared at him. If he had come to apologize to me earlier, or confess to me earlier, maybe I would have been very happy, but now it's too late, no matter what. I shouldn't have hurt you like this. A flash of loneliness passed through his eyes. Emily, I understand that you may not be able to forgive me, but I really want to say sorry to you. If you are willing to let go of this matter, I will always wait for you. I smiled gently. Forget about forgiveness. Believe it or not, I have never hated you. You have supported me for more than 10 years. I will never forget this. Is that all that's left? He looked calm, but his fingers were trembling slightly. This showed that he didn't really feel this way. You will always be my big brother. I have recently come to understand. In fact, your love is not necessary in my life. Entanglement will only annoy you. I know how you feel. I closed the jewelry box and returned it to him. This gift is too valuable. I don't need it. You can dispose of it yourself. Mason, I'll show you around in the next few days. Let's pretend that nothing happened before. Let's just forget about it. He lowered his head. A small smile appeared on his face. His tone was a little sad. Emily, you've changed. I'd rather you lose your temper with me, okay? Then I'll just be your big brother from now on, I laughed. I've finally grown up. A little late, but I've finally matured. For 10 years, I've never taken a proper holiday. This time, Mason made an exception and accompanied me on a trip to Europe. We walked past a jewelry and antique shop on the Seine. A large gemstone ring in the window immediately caught my eye. The shopkeeper was a fashionable little old lady. She enthusiastically introduced it to me. This is the engagement ring of the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. Miss, look. The band is engraved with their vow. We are ours 27x36. The emerald center stone weighs 20 carats. Then she looks at me expectantly. How much is it? I want to buy it. Mason asks casually, but the little old lady shakes her head. It's part of my collection. I'm not selling it. Actually, I only got the ring recently. Forget it. I hold back Mason, who is still trying to bargain. I don't need those things either. You can't wear jewelry when doing experiments. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor were each other's lifelong loves. As for Mason and me, there's no need to comfort yourself by pretending to be in someone else's shoes. He wanted to say something. I pointed at a nearby shopping mall. I'm hungry. Let's go eat. This is the busiest place in Paris, even if it's not a holiday. There are still a lot of people. I led him through the crowd. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out in the mall. Everyone panicked and scattered. Screams could be heard everywhere. Amidst the chaos, Mason held onto me tightly, protecting me behind his back. Just then, with a bang, a bullet pierced his shoulder. Blood immediately flowed out. I was so overwhelmed with panic that I didn't know what to do. Mason, let's go, he said with gritted teeth. It's okay, just a scratch. He took me in his arms. Suddenly, he pulled a gun out of nowhere. He opened fire on the thugs. He was good at it. He took care of several of them in no time. At that moment, the sirens could be heard in the distance. He let out a sigh of relief. He sat down, covering his shoulder. The ambulance arrived. The doctor quickly cut open his shirt. He had lost a lot of blood. He was a little delirious, but he still held his chest tightly. He doesn't let anyone touch him. The paramedics next to him look embarrassed. Emily, Mason, I'm here. I take his hand. My voice is hoarse. A little silver light is flashing under the black shirt. Mason actually has a pendant on him. He never wears any accessories. And what he just held on to so tightly is this very thing. I tremble. Slowly, I pull his hand away. It turned out that it wasn't a pendant. It was 2 rings strung on a white gold chain. The cold light gleamed. Those were the couple rings I had thrown away. Mason was admitted to the hospital. Fortunately, he wasn't seriously injured. The doctor said that as long as the bullet was removed, he could rest for a while and then be discharged. A young nurse came to change the dressing. I heard that he was injured for me. He even fought off several bad guys alone, so she started to gently change the dressing. She sighed. Your boyfriend really is good to you. When I heard this, I felt a little embarrassed. I hurriedly explained. No, he's my brother. Just then, Mason woke up. He was lying in the hospital bed. His hair was messy in front of his forehead. He looked less energetic than before. He just looked pale. I heard him say shakily, Emily, What if I don't want to be your brother? The little nurse had already run off to call the doctor. We were the only two people left in the intensive care unit. I didn't know how to answer for a moment, so I subconsciously turned my head away. He laughed at himself. You're not even willing to look at me now. I panicked a little. I turned my head to explain, but I happened to catch his eyes. Because of the illness, his eyes looked much clearer than before. The sense of strength in him disappeared. Instead, there was a hint of sadness in the boy. It was this faint sense of vulnerability that made me sink deeper into it. It felt like 10 years had passed in an instant. His voice was low, but I could hear it clearly. I looked into his eyes. Suddenly my heart settled, so I interrupted him and said it outright, "You like me." A flash of surprise crossed his eyes. Then he lowered his head and let out a soft sigh. "You know everything." I smiled softly, knowing everything in my heart. I lowered myself, pulled open his shirt, grabbed the 2 ring pendants. What is this? Why is this happening at this moment? I have never been so close to him. I am on top. He is on the bottom. The hospital bed no longer makes a difference in our height difference. At this moment, he is looking up at me. "Mason, you have been hiding for so many years. Why don't you continue to hide?" I thought to myself, why did you come to the UK? Why did you pull me to stay? Why did you say those words? My heart felt a little sad. He gently stroked my face. Suddenly, I couldn't hold back the tears. The Roman 4 drip fell from his hand. Blood dripped onto the back of my hand. He trembled slightly. He said, "Emily, I love you. I've always loved you." My heart tightened. He was younger than me. I always felt that I was no longer suitable for him. He deserved a better life. He shouldn't waste it on someone like me, 10 years his senior. I thought I could let go, that I could let him go free. But I couldn't. Mason said, "I love you." I've been waiting for those words for years. But when I finally heard them, I felt like I was in another world. I loved him once, but he always rejected me. Now he loves me, and I can't return the feeling. I gently took his hand. Then slowly I let go of his hand. "Mason, loving me is no reason to hurt me. From the moment you tricked me into that room, our love was over." I pulled away. Mason stumbled out of bed. Half kneeling on the floor, he clutched my hand. "Emily, give me a chance. Can you?" I looked down at him and sighed. "Mason, let's heal the wound first." A long time later, I heard a low, bitter laugh. I knew what he was thinking. Half a month later, Mason was discharged from the hospital and returned home. That night, someone happened to be setting off fireworks. In the dark night sky, the fireworks shone like stars. The words "Marry Me" blossomed in the air. There was cheering all around. The wind at the airport was a bit strong. I wrapped my coat around me, I squinted my eyes, and I smiled. It's really nice. Mason also smiles. When he was a child, he especially liked setting off fireworks. Now it's not very convenient in the country. Here you can watch as much as you like. It's really nice. He has one hand in his pocket, wearing a black, high-end suit, standing in the wind, looking a little lonely. I hear him take a deep breath. "Emily, is there still hope for our relationship?" I look at the night sky. My heart is heavy. "Mason, have you heard the saying? Missing is not a mistake. It's not seizing the opportunity. That's what happened to us." He was silent for a while and finally said softly, "Okay, Emily, take care of yourself." Then he got on the private jet and left. Fireworks were still blooming in the sky. I walked down the street, listening to the excited discussions of the people around me. Look at the photo I took. There seems to be an L here. Wow, it's so romantic. Could it be that the person setting off the fireworks is L? Maybe it's the person collecting them. I smile softly. I put my hands in my pockets. Suddenly, I feel something hard. I take it out and look at it. It's a small jewelry box. At this moment, I remember what Mason said before he left. "Emily, give me a hug." He puts the jewelry box in my pocket. I open it. Inside is the engagement ring of the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. I was a little stunned. When did he buy this ring? Right. His assistant just returned from Europe the day before yesterday. He must have bought it then. My heart started pounding again. I saw countless scenes of him coldly rejecting me flash through my mind. And there were also the 2 rings on his chest. I thought of the lie on that rainy night, and I also thought of the way he did everything to protect me. I let out a long sigh. I closed the jewelry box. Oscar Wilde said, "Life is like one foolish thing after another, and love is two fools chasing after each other." I smiled wryly. I walked towards the school.